In the summer of 1906, German archaeologist Hugo Winkler stood before a massive mound rising from the Anatolian plateau, near the village of Bakıskale, Turkey, unaware that beneath his feet lay buried the capital of one of the ancient world's most powerful empires. As his team's pickaxes struck the hardened earth and their brushes carefully swept away millennia of accumulated dust, fragments of cuneiform tablets began to emerge from the archaeological layers, each bearing inscriptions in a mysterious language that would soon revolutionize our understanding of Bronze Age civilization. The tablets, numbering in the thousands, represented the royal archives of Hattusa, the great capital of the Hittite Empire, a civilization so thoroughly lost to history that until Winkler's discoveries, scholars had only glimpsed references to these people in Egyptian records and biblical texts. The archaeological revelation at Bakıskale would prove that the Hittites were not merely a minor Bronze Age tribe, but rather the architects of a sophisticated empire that controlled vast swaths of Anatolia and northern Syria for over 5 centuries, wielding military might that could challenge Egypt's pharaohs, and establishing diplomatic relationships that stretched from the Aegean Sea to Mesopotamia. The material culture emerging from these excavations painted a picture of remarkable complexity, with massive stone fortifications, elaborate temple complexes, sophisticated metallurgical workshops, and an advanced writing system that preserved not only administrative records but also religious texts, legal codes, and historical annals that would provide unprecedented insight into Bronze Age geopolitics. The stratigraphic evidence from Hattusa revealed a civilization that rose from humble beginnings around 1650 BCE to become the dominant power in the Near East by 1400 BCE, establishing a legacy that would influence Anatolian culture for millennia. Archaeological assemblages from Hittite sites across modern Turkey have yielded evidence of advanced urban planning with carefully designed drainage systems, multi-story buildings constructed from massive stone blocks, and elaborate decorative programs featuring relief sculptures that depicted both religious ceremonies and royal propaganda. The pottery sherds recovered from these sites demonstrate sophisticated ceramic traditions that evolved over centuries, with distinctive red burnished wares giving way to increasingly elaborate painted vessels that reflected both local traditions and foreign influences absorbed through extensive trade networks. Metallurgical analysis of Hittite artifacts has revealed that these ancient smiths were among the first to master iron technology, developing techniques for smelting and forging iron tools and weapons that would give them significant military advantages over their Bronze Age contemporaries. While isotope studies of metal artifacts have traced raw materials to sources across Anatolia, demonstrating the empire's control over crucial mineral resources, the cuneiform archives discovered at Hattusa contain over 30,000 tablet fragments, written primarily in Hittite, an Indo-European language that represents one of the earliest recorded members of the linguistic family, though the archives also preserve texts in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the Bronze Age Near East, as well as Hurrian, Luwian, and several other languages that reflect the multicultural nature of the Hittite Empire. Religious texts from these archives describe elaborate festivals that could last for weeks, involving processions through the capital city, ritual offerings at dozens of temples, and ceremonies that reinforce the divine nature of Hittite kingship. While legal documents preserve one of the world's earliest comprehensive law codes, revealing a society that distinguished between different social classes, but maintained relatively progressive attitudes toward issues like divorce, property rights, and criminal justice. The archaeological evidence from Hittite sites demonstrates sophisticated architectural techniques, including the use of massive polygonal masonry that fitted together without mortar, creating walls that could withstand both military assault and the frequent earthquakes that plagued the Anatolian region. While excavations at temple sites have revealed complex ceremonial spaces, decorated with relief sculptures that depicted gods, kings, and mythological creatures in intricate detail that rivals contemporary Egyptian and Mesopotamian art, Trade relationships evidenced by archaeological materials demonstrate that Hittite merchants maintained commercial connections throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, importing luxury goods like ivory, precious stones, and exotic metals while exporting Anatolian products including metals, textiles, and agricultural surpluses, creating economic networks that would survive the empire's political collapse and continue to influence regional trade patterns well into the Iron Age. The origins of Hittite civilization can be traced through archaeological evidence to the gradual consolidation of various Anatolian peoples during the early 2nd millennium BCE, a process that involved both indigenous cultural development and the incorporation of influences from Indo-European-speaking populations who had migrated into the region during the preceding centuries. Stratigraphic analysis of pre-Hittite sites across central Anatolia reveals a complex pattern of cultural change beginning around 2000 BCE, when archaeological assemblages begin to show evidence of new pottery styles, burial practices, and architectural techniques that suggest the arrival and integration of new populations with existing Anatolian communities. The material culture of this formative period demonstrates sophisticated metalworking traditions that built upon earlier Anatolian achievements in copper and bronze technology, while introducing new techniques for working precious metals and developing the technological foundations that would later support Hittite military supremacy. Through innovations in iron production, settlement patterns during this early period show increasing urban concentration, with fortified hilltop sites becoming more common and larger, suggesting both population growth and increasing political centralization as local chieftains consolidated control over broader territories. The pottery traditions of early Hittite sites reveal a fascinating blend of local Anatolian ceramic styles with new forms and decorative techniques that may reflect Indo-European cultural influences, creating distinctive red burnished wares that would become characteristic of Hittite material culture and serve as diagnostic markers for archaeologists studying the empire's territorial expansion. Burial practices documented in early Hittite cemeteries show significant variation in grave goods and tomb construction, indicating a society that was developing increasingly complex social hierarchies while maintaining certain egalitarian traditions, with some individuals buried with elaborate collections of weapons, jewelry, and imported luxury goods while others received simpler interments that nonetheless included carefully crafted local pottery and personal ornaments. The linguistic evidence from the earliest Hittite texts, dating to around 1650 BCE, preserves archaic forms of the Hittite language that demonstrate its relationship to other Indo-European languages while also showing extensive borrowing from non-Indo-European languages spoken by earlier Anatolian populations, creating a linguistic synthesis that mirrors the cultural blending evident in the archaeological record. Religious practices during this formative period, as reconstructed from later Hittite texts that preserve ancient traditions, involve the worship of numerous deities including storm gods, earth goddesses, and solar deities that combined Indo-European religious concepts with local Anatolian traditions, creating a complex pantheon that would continue to evolve throughout the empire's history. Through the incorporation of gods and religious practices from conquered territories, archaeological evidence from this period also reveals the development of specialized craft production, with workshops dedicated to metalworking, pottery production, textile manufacture, and stone carving becoming increasingly common at major sites, suggesting the economic diversification and technological innovation that would support the empire's later expansion. The fortification systems constructed during this early period demonstrate increasingly sophisticated military engineering, with massive stone walls, complex gate systems, and carefully planned defensive positions that reflect both the martial culture of the emerging Hittite elite and their need to defend their territories against raids from neighboring peoples, while also serving as symbols of political authority that reinforce the legitimacy of local rulers. Trade relationships during the formative period, as evidenced by imported materials found in archaeological contexts, demonstrate that Proto-Hittite communities maintained commercial connections with Mesopotamian merchants, Aegean traders, and other Anatolian groups, creating economic networks that would later be expanded and formalized under imperial administration. The gradual emergence of distinctively Hittite cultural traits during this period can be traced through changes in artistic styles, architectural techniques, and ritual practices that would later become standard throughout the empire, suggesting a process of cultural synthesis and innovation that transformed diverse local traditions into the foundations of a unified imperial culture. The establishment of the Hittite state as a recognizable political entity can be traced to the reigns of early kings whose names are preserved in later historical records, though the archaeological evidence for this period remains fragmentary due to the destruction and rebuilding that characterize major Hittite sites throughout their long history. Anita, whose deeds are recorded in one of the earliest Hittite texts, appears to have been a crucial figure in the consolidation of central Anatolian territories during the 17th century BCE, establishing control over key cities including Kanish, which had previously served as an important trading post for Syrian merchants, and Hattusa, which he reportedly destroyed before cursing anyone who might attempt to rebuild it. The archaeological evidence from Kanish, modern Kulti, provides remarkable insight into the commercial and political networks that the early Hittite rulers inherited and transformed, with thousands of cuneiform tablets from Assyrian merchant archives documenting sophisticated trading relationships, credit arrangements, and political negotiations that demonstrate the economic sophistication of pre-Hittite Anatolia. The material culture associated with these early kings reveals a society that was rapidly developing the administrative and military capabilities necessary for territorial expansion, with standardized pottery forms, weaponry designs, and architectural elements appearing across multiple sites in a pattern that suggests centralized authority and cultural unification. Hattusili I, traditionally considered the founder of the Hittite kingdom proper, appears to have established the first truly centralized Hittite state around 1650 BCE, choosing to rebuild Hattusa despite Anita's curse and transforming it into a capital city whose massive fortifications and elaborate palace complexes would serve as the symbolic and administrative center of Hittite power for centuries. Archaeological excavations at Hattusa have revealed the remains of Hattusili's building projects, including portions of the earliest palace complex and defensive walls, that demonstrate sophisticated engineering techniques and massive investment in public construction that could only have been supported by the resources of a unified kingdom. The reign of Hattusili I also marks the beginning of Hittite territorial expansion beyond central Anatolia, with military campaigns that extended Hittite influence into northern Syria and brought the kingdom into direct contact with the major powers of the Bronze Age Near East, including Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. The material evidence for these early military campaigns includes weapons, fortification systems, and settlement patterns that reveal the development of distinctively Hittite military technologies and strategies, including the use of advanced chariot designs, siege techniques, and combined infantry and cavalry tactics that would later prove decisive in major battles against Egyptian and Mesopotamian armies. Religious developments during this period, as evidenced by temple architecture and ritual objects recovered from archaeological contexts, show the systematic integration of local Anatolian deities into an increasingly elaborate royal cult that served to legitimize Hittite political authority while maintaining the loyalty of diverse ethnic and linguistic groups within the expanding kingdom. The administrative innovations of early Hittite kings, preserved in cuneiform archives and reflected in the archaeological record, through standardized weights, measures, and architectural features, demonstrate the development of bureaucratic systems capable of governing a large ethnically diverse territory while maintaining military readiness for continued expansion. Legal traditions established during this period, as preserved in later Hittite law codes, reveal a sophisticated understanding of jurisprudence that balanced royal prerogatives with traditional local customs, creating a legal framework that could accommodate the diverse populations being incorporated into the growing kingdom, while maintaining central authority. Economic policies implemented by early Hittite rulers, as evidenced by changes in trade patterns, craft production, and agricultural organization visible in the archaeological record, demonstrate systematic efforts to maximize the economic potential of conquered territories while ensuring adequate resources for military campaigns and monumental construction projects. The artistic traditions that emerged during this formative period of Hittite statehood, preserved in relief sculptures, seal designs, and decorative objects, reveal the development of a distinctive Hittite artistic style that combined local Anatolian traditions with influences from Mesopotamian and Syrian art, creating visual symbols of royal power that would be refined and elaborated throughout the empire's history. The transformation of the Hittite kingdom into a true empire occurred during the reigns of Suppiluliuma I and his successors in the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, a period marked by unprecedented territorial expansion, sophisticated diplomatic relationships, and the development of administrative systems capable of governing a multi-ethnic empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Euphrates River. Archaeological evidence from this imperial period demonstrates remarkable cultural and technological achievements, including the construction of massive urban centers, the development of advanced metallurgical techniques, and the creation of artistic works that rival the finest productions of contemporary Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations. The reign of Suppiluliuma I, which began around 1344 BCE, marked the beginning of Hittite imperial expansion on a scale that transformed the geopolitical landscape of the Bronze Age Near East, with military campaigns that conquered the powerful Kingdom of Mitanni, established Hittite control over northern Syria, and brought the empire into direct confrontation with Egyptian forces under Pharaoh Amenhotep III and his successors. The material evidence for these campaigns includes fortified outposts, garrison towns, and administrative centers constructed throughout the conquered territories, with archaeological assemblages that demonstrate the systematic implementation of Hittite administrative practices while accommodating local customs and religious traditions. The diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Amarna archives provides remarkable insight into the sophisticated international relationships maintained by Hittite kings, with letters between Suppiluliuma and the Egyptian pharaoh revealing negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and marriage alliances that demonstrate the empire's recognition as an equal power by the established civilizations of the Near East. The architectural achievements of the imperial period, evidenced by the massive stone fortifications, elaborate palace complexes, and monumental temple structures constructed at Atusa and other major sites, demonstrate the empire's ability to mobilize enormous resources for public works projects, while maintaining military readiness for continued expansion and defense against external threats. Religious developments during this period reveal the systematic incorporation of conquered peoples' deities into the Hittite pantheon, creating a syncretic religious system that served both to legitimize imperial rule and to maintain the loyalty of diverse subject populations. While archaeological evidence from temple sites demonstrates the wealth and sophistication of imperial religious practices, the military innovations of the imperial period, including the development of iron weapons and advanced siege techniques, provided Hittite armies with technological advantages that enabled them to defeat Bronze Age opponents and maintain control over vast territories despite the challenges of communication and logistics in the pre-modern world. Economic policies of the imperial period, as evidenced by changes in trade patterns, resource extraction, and craft production visible in the archaeological record, demonstrate systematic efforts to exploit the economic potential of the empires. Diverse territories while maintaining the financial resources necessary for military operations, administrative expenses, and monumental construction projects. The legal and administrative systems developed during this period, preserved in thousands of cuneiform tablets from the royal archives, reveal sophisticated approaches to governance that balance central authority with local autonomy, creating administrative frameworks that could accommodate the empire's ethnic and linguistic diversity, while maintaining political unity. Cultural achievements of the imperial period, including literature, art, and religious thought preserved in cuneiform texts and archaeological remains, demonstrate the intellectual sophistication of Hittite civilization and its contributions to the broader cultural development of the Bronze Age world. The international relationships maintained by imperial Hittite kings, documented in diplomatic correspondence and treaty texts, reveal a sophisticated understanding of international law and diplomacy that would influence Near Eastern political practices for centuries, while archaeological evidence demonstrates the extensive trade networks and cultural exchanges that connected the Hittite Empire to civilizations throughout the ancient world. The military organization and warfare strategies of the Hittite Empire represent one of the most sophisticated and effective military systems of the Bronze Age world, combining innovative technologies, strategic thinking, and organizational capabilities that enabled a relatively small population based in central Anatolia to conquer and control territories spanning from the Aegean coast to the borders of Mesopotamia, and from the Black Sea to northern Syria. Archaeological evidence from Hittite military sites reveals the systematic development of fortification systems that incorporated advanced engineering techniques, including massive stone walls constructed from carefully fitted polygonal blocks, complex gate systems featuring multiple defensive lines, and innovative architectural elements such as corbelled arches and sophisticated drainage systems that prevented siege warfare from undermining defensive positions. The weapons technology employed by Hittite forces, as evidenced by archaeological finds from military contexts and detailed descriptions in cuneiform texts, demonstrates remarkable innovation and sophistication, including the early adoption and refinement of iron weapons that provided significant advantages over Bronze Age opponents. Advanced chariot designs that maximize speed and maneuverability, while providing stable platforms for archers and spear throwers, and siege equipment, including battering rams, scaling ladders, and specialized tools for undermining enemy fortifications. Military organization within the Hittite system, as reconstructed from administrative texts and archaeological evidence, reveals a complex hierarchy that combined professional standing forces with territorial militias, specialized units trained for specific types of combat, and auxiliary forces recruited from allied and subject peoples, creating a military structure capable of conducting simultaneous operations across multiple fronts, while maintaining adequate reserves for defensive purposes. The logistics system supporting Hittite military operations, evidenced by storage facilities, supply depots, and transportation networks visible in the archaeological record, demonstrate sophisticated planning and resource management capabilities that enabled armies to operate effectively across vast distances and challenging terrain, while maintaining adequate supplies of food, weapons, and equipment for extended campaigns. Strategic concepts employed by Hittite military commanders, as revealed through analysis of campaign records and battle accounts preserved in royal annals, show advanced understanding of combined arms tactics, the integration of different troop types for maximum effectiveness, and the systematic use of intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and diplomatic negotiations to achieve military objectives with minimal cost in lives and resources. The role of chariot warfare and Hittite military doctrine represents a particular area of innovation and excellence, with archaeological evidence from chariot burials and workshop sites revealing sophisticated vehicle designs that incorporated advanced metallurgy, precision woodworking, and careful attention to weight distribution and structural integrity that maximize performance in battle conditions. Infantry organization within Hittite armies, as evidenced by weapons finds, training facilities, and military texts, reveal systematic approaches to soldier training, equipment standardization, and tactical deployment that created highly effective fighting units capable of operating independently or in coordination with chariot forces and siege specialists. The integration of foreign military techniques and technologies into Hittite warfare, demonstrated by the adoption and adaptation of weapons, tactics, and organizational methods from conquered peoples and allied forces, reveals a pragmatic and innovative approach to military development that continuously improved the empire's fighting capabilities through systematic learning and experimentation. Naval capabilities of the Hittite Empire, though less well documented than land-based military forces, are evidenced by coastal fortifications, harbor facilities, and references in texts to naval operations, suggesting that Hittite military planners understood the importance of controlling sea routes and coastal territories for maintaining imperial security and economic prosperity. Military engineering capabilities of Hittite forces, demonstrated by the construction of fortified positions, siege works, and infrastructure projects in conquered territories, reveal sophisticated understanding of engineering principles and project management that enabled rapid consolidation of territorial gains and effective long-term control over strategic positions. The relationship between military organization and civil administration in the Hittite system, as evidenced by the integration of military commanders into governmental hierarchies, and the use of military personnel for administrative functions in conquered territories, demonstrates systematic approaches to imperial governance that maximize the effectiveness of limited human resources, while maintaining both military readiness and administrative efficiency. Throughout the empire's vast territories, the religious and cultural life of the Hittite Empire reveals a remarkably sophisticated and syncretic civilization that successfully integrated diverse theological traditions, artistic styles, and cultural practices from across Anatolia and the broader Near Eastern world into a coherent imperial culture that served both to legitimize Hittite political authority and to maintain social cohesion among the empire's ethnically and linguistically diverse populations. Archaeological evidence from religious sites throughout the empire demonstrates the construction and maintenance of hundreds of temples, ranging from modest local shrines to massive ceremonial complexes that rival the greatest religious architecture of contemporary civilizations, with the temple complex at Hattusa alone containing over 30 separate temple buildings dedicated to various deities in the Hittite pantheon. The religious texts preserved in the cuneiform archives reveal a pantheon of extraordinary complexity, incorporating not only traditional Anatolian deities such as the weather god and the sun goddess of Erina, but also Mesopotamian gods like E and Marduk, Hurrian deities including Teshub and Apat, and numerous local gods and goddesses adopted from conquered territories, creating a theological system that reflected the empire's multicultural character while maintaining distinctive Hittite interpretations and ritual practices. Ritual practices documented in religious texts and evidenced by archaeological remains from temple sites reveal elaborate ceremonial cycles that could extend for weeks or months, involving processions through urban centers, complex offerings of food, drink, and precious objects, ritual performances including music, dance, and dramatic presentations, and ceremonies that required the participation of the king, royal family, high priests, and representatives from throughout the empire. The role of the king in Hittite religious life was central and multifaceted, with royal duties including serving as high priest for major state deities, maintaining the empire's relationship with the divine world through personal ritual obligations, and ensuring the proper performance of religious ceremonies that were believed essential for maintaining the empire's prosperity, military success, and protection from natural disasters. Archaeological evidence from palace complexes reveals the integration of religious and secular functions in royal architecture, with private chapels, ceremonial halls, and ritual preparation areas incorporated into residential and administrative spaces, demonstrating the inseparable connection between political authority and religious responsibility. In Hittite imperial ideology, the festival calendar of the Hittite Empire is reconstructed from religious texts and correlated with archaeological evidence for seasonal activities, reveals a sophisticated understanding of agricultural cycles, astronomical observations, and religious timing that created a complex rhythm of ceremonial activities designed to ensure divine favor for agricultural productivity, military ventures, and imperial stability. Artistic production within the Hittite Empire, evidenced by relief sculptures, decorative objects, and architectural ornaments found throughout imperial territories, demonstrates sophisticated aesthetic traditions that combine Anatolian stylistic elements with influences from Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Syrian art, creating distinctive imperial artistic styles that served both decorative and propagandistic functions. The treatment of conquered peoples' religious traditions within the imperial system reveals remarkable tolerance and systematic integration, with local deities being incorporated into the imperial pantheon, local temples being maintained and supported by imperial resources, and local religious practices being preserved and adapted rather than suppressed, creating a model of religious pluralism that contributed to the empire's political stability and cultural richness. Magic and divination practices within Hittite civilization, documented in specialized texts and evidenced by ritual objects found in archaeological contexts, reveal sophisticated systems of supernatural knowledge that were integrated into both personal religious practice and state policy, with professional diviners, magicians, and ritual specialists serving important roles in imperial administration and military planning. The preservation and transmission of religious knowledge within the Hittite system, evidenced by the extensive religious libraries found at major sites, and the standardization of ritual practices across the empire, demonstrates systematic approaches to priestly education, religious scholarship, and cultural continuity that maintain theological sophistication and ceremonial effectiveness throughout the empire's long history. Literary achievements of Hittite civilization, including religious poetry, mythological narratives, and historical epics preserved in the cuneiform archives, reveal sophisticated literary traditions that combine local Anatolian storytelling with international literary influences, creating works that contributed to the broader cultural development of the Bronze Age world, while preserving distinctive Hittite perspectives on divine action, human destiny, and imperial purpose. The economic foundations of the Hittite Empire rested upon sophisticated systems of resource extraction, trade management, and agricultural organization that enabled the empire to support large urban populations, maintain extensive military forces, and fund massive construction projects while creating the wealth necessary for sustaining imperial administration across vast and diverse territories. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites throughout the empire reveals systematic approaches to agricultural intensification, including the construction of sophisticated irrigation systems, terrace field systems that maximized arable land in mountainous regions, and storage facilities that could preserve grain surpluses for multiple years, creating the food security necessary for supporting non-agricultural populations and maintaining military readiness during extended campaigns. The empire's control over Anatolia's rich mineral resources, evidenced by the location of major settlements near metal-producing regions, and the extensive remains of ancient mining and smelting operations, provided the foundation for both military superiority through advanced metallurgy and economic prosperity through metal exports, with archaeological analysis of metal artifacts revealing sophisticated techniques for extracting and processing copper, tin, silver, gold, and eventually iron from deposits throughout the imperial territories. Trade relationships maintained by the Hittite Empire, as evidenced by imported materials found in archaeological contexts and commercial correspondence preserved in cuneiform archives, demonstrate extensive networks that connected Anatolian producers with markets throughout the Mediterranean world, Mesopotamia, and beyond, creating economic relationships that survived political changes and continued to influence regional commerce long after the empire's collapse. Manufacturing capabilities within the empire, revealed by workshop sites and craft production areas excavated at major urban centers, show sophisticated specialization in pottery production, textile manufacture, metalworking, woodworking, and luxury goods production, with standardized techniques and quality control measures that enabled Hittite products to compete effectively in international markets while meeting the demands of imperial administration and elite consumption. Agricultural techniques employed throughout the empire, as reconstructed from archaeological remains of field systems, farming tools, and storage facilities, demonstrate advanced understanding of soil management, crop rotation, animal husbandry, and food preservation that maximize productivity, while maintaining long-term agricultural sustainability across diverse environmental zones. From Mediterranean coastal plains to high Anatolian plateaus, labor organization within the imperial economy, as evidenced by administrative texts describing work assignments, payment systems, and production quotas, reveals complex systems that combine free-wage labor, corvée service by subject populations, and specialized craftsmen working under royal patronage, creating workforce management capabilities that could mobilize enormous human resources for public works projects while maintaining productive capacity in agriculture and manufacturing. Transportation infrastructure supporting the imperial economy, evidenced by the remains of roads, bridges, way stations, and harbor facilities, demonstrates systematic investment in communication and commercial networks that facilitated the movement of goods, people, and information across the empire's challenging terrain while providing the logistical capabilities necessary for effective military operations and administrative control. Taxation and tribute systems employed by the empire, documented in administrative texts and reflected in the archaeological record, through evidence of standardized weights, measures, and storage facilities, reveal sophisticated approaches to resource extraction that balanced imperial needs with local economic capacity, while providing incentives for continued production and political loyalty among subject populations. International economic relationships maintained by the empire, evidenced by diplomatic correspondence dealing with commercial agreements, payment of tribute, and regulation of merchant activities, demonstrate understanding of international trade, law, and economic cooperation that enabled the empire to benefit from broader Near Eastern prosperity, while protecting domestic economic interests. Technological innovations developed within the imperial economy, including advances in metallurgy, ceramic production, textile manufacturing, and construction techniques, provided competitive advantages that enhanced both military capabilities and commercial success while contributing to the broader technological development of the Bronze Age world. Resource management policies implemented throughout the empire, as evidenced by the systematic exploitation of forests, mineral deposits, and agricultural land visible in the archaeological record, demonstrate long-term planning capabilities and environmental awareness that sustained economic prosperity over centuries, while maintaining the resource base necessary for continued imperial expansion and consolidation. Monetary systems and commercial practices within the empire, as revealed by standardized weights and measures, commercial contracts, and evidence of credit arrangements in cuneiform texts, show sophisticated understanding of economic principles that facilitated complex commercial transactions while maintaining stable exchange rates and commercial relationships that supported both domestic prosperity and international trade. The diplomatic relationships and international politics of the Hittite Empire represent one of the most sophisticated and well-documented examples of Bronze Age statecraft, with extensive cuneiform archives preserving correspondence between Hittite kings and their counterparts throughout the Near Eastern world, revealing complex networks of alliances, treaties, trade agreements, and territorial negotiations that demonstrate advanced understanding of international law, diplomatic protocol, and strategic thinking. The empire's relationship with Egypt, perhaps the most extensively documented international relationship of the Bronze Age world, evolved from initial military confrontation through the famous Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE to the establishment of the world's first known peace treaty, signed between Hattusili III and Ramesses II around 1259 BCE, a document that established principles of mutual defense, extradition of refugees, and peaceful coexistence that would influence international law for millennia. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Hittite-Egyptian frontier reveals the implementation of this peace agreement through the establishment of neutral zones, joint trading posts, and shared religious ceremonies that demonstrated both kingdoms' commitment to maintaining peaceful relationships while protecting their respective territorial and commercial interests. Diplomatic relationships with Mesopotamian powers, including Assyria and Babylon, as documented in royal correspondence and treaty texts, reveal complex negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade routes, and mutual defense obligations that required sophisticated understanding of regional power balances and strategic priorities, with Hittite diplomats demonstrating remarkable skill in maintaining beneficial relationships with multiple powers while avoiding entanglement in conflicts that might damage imperial interests. The empire's management of relationships with smaller neighboring states and tribute-paying territories, evidenced by administrative texts and archaeological remains from frontier regions, demonstrate systematic approaches to imperial diplomacy that combine military deterrence with economic incentives and cultural accommodation, creating stable buffer zones that protected core imperial territories while providing resources and strategic advantages. Marriage diplomacy practiced by Hittite rulers, including the strategic marriages of royal daughters to foreign kings, and the negotiation of marriage alliances as components of broader diplomatic agreements, reveal sophisticated understanding of kinship politics and dynastic relationships that could create lasting bonds between kingdoms, while providing mechanisms for peaceful resolution of conflicts. International trade regulations negotiated by Hittite diplomats, as preserved in commercial agreements and diplomatic correspondence, demonstrate advanced understanding of economic statecraft and the relationship between commercial prosperity and political stability, with carefully negotiated agreements that protected Hittite merchants while providing mutual benefits to trading partners throughout the region. The role of religious ceremonies and shared cultural practices in Hittite diplomacy, evidenced by records of joint festivals, exchange of religious gifts, and mutual recognition of divine authority, reveals sophisticated understanding of the symbolic and spiritual dimensions of international relationships that complemented practical political and economic agreements, intelligence gathering, and information management capabilities of Hittite diplomats, as revealed through analysis of diplomatic correspondence and references to espionage activities in royal annals, demonstrate systematic approaches to collecting and analyzing information about foreign kingdoms that enabled informed decision-making and strategic planning in international negotiations. Conflict resolution mechanisms employed in Hittite diplomatic practice, including formal arbitration procedures, hostage exchanges, and ritual ceremonies for oath-taking and treaty ratification, reveal advanced understanding of international law and dispute resolution that provided alternatives to military conflict while maintaining the honor and interests of all parties involved. The training and selection of diplomatic personnel within the Hittite system is evidenced by references to diplomatic careers in administrative texts, and the sophisticated knowledge of international affairs demonstrated in diplomatic correspondence suggest systematic approaches to developing professional diplomatic capabilities that maintain continuity and effectiveness in international relationships across multiple reigns. Cultural exchange facilitated by Hittite diplomatic relationships, evidenced by the spread of artistic styles, religious practices, and technological innovations across international boundaries, demonstrates the broader civilizational impact of diplomatic activities that extended far beyond immediate political and military concerns to influence cultural development throughout the Bronze Age world. Legal frameworks governing international relationships, as preserved in treaty texts and diplomatic protocols, reveal sophisticated understanding of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and international obligations that contributed to the development of international law concepts that would influence political thinking for thousands of years. The decline and transformation of the Hittite Empire during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE represents one of the most dramatic and historically significant collapses in Bronze Age history, involving complex interactions between internal political instability, external military pressures, environmental challenges, and broader systemic changes that affected civilizations throughout the Eastern Mediterranean world during this period of widespread upheaval. Archaeological evidence from the final phases of Hittite occupation at major sites reveals a pattern of gradual decline rather than sudden catastrophic destruction, with reduced construction activity, declining quality of material culture, evidence of economic disruption, and eventual abandonment of major urban centers that suggest a complex process of imperial dissolution rather than simple military defeat. The reign of Tudalia IV, one of the last great Hittite kings, demonstrates both the empire's continued military capabilities and the growing challenges it faced, with successful campaigns against rebellious vassals and external enemies occurring, alongside evidence of increasing difficulty in maintaining imperial unity and defending against new threats from multiple directions. Environmental factors contributing to imperial decline, as evidenced by paleoclimatic data and archaeological evidence for agricultural disruption, include prolonged drought conditions that reduced agricultural productivity, climate change that affected traditional farming patterns, and ecological pressures that strained the empire's ability to support large urban populations and maintain adequate food supplies for military campaigns. The role of the Sea Peoples, mysterious maritime raiders who attack coastlands throughout the Eastern Mediterranean during this period, represents a crucial external pressure on the declining empire, with Egyptian records documenting major Sea Peoples attacks on Hittite territories, and archaeological evidence suggesting widespread destruction of coastal settlements and disruption of trade networks that were essential to imperial prosperity. Internal political instability during the empire's final decades, evidenced by references to succession disputes, rebellions by vassal rulers, and conflicts between central authority and regional governors in contemporary texts, reveals the breakdown of administrative systems that had previously maintained imperial unity across diverse and far-flung territories. Economic disruption accompanying imperial decline, as evidenced by changes in trade patterns, declining quality of manufactured goods, and abandonment of specialized craft production centers visible in the archaeological record, demonstrates the interconnected nature of political authority and economic prosperity and maintaining imperial systems. Military challenges faced by the late empire, including the need to defend against attacks from multiple enemies simultaneously, while dealing with internal rebellions and maintaining garrisons across vast territories, exceeded the empire's available resources and contributed to a cycle of weakening defenses and increasing vulnerability to external attack. The process of territorial fragmentation that characterized the empire's final phase, with various regions asserting independence or falling under the control of local strongmen, is evidenced by the emergence of Neo-Hittite kingdoms in northern Syria and southeastern Anatolia that maintained certain Hittite cultural traditions, while developing independent political identities. Cultural continuity despite political collapse is demonstrated by the survival of Hittite religious practices, artistic traditions, and technological knowledge in successor states and neighboring regions, with archaeological evidence showing the persistence of distinctively Hittite cultural elements for centuries. After the empire's political dissolution, the destruction of Hattusa around 1180 BCE, evidenced by extensive burning and abandonment layers in the archaeological record, marked the symbolic end of imperial power, though the circumstances of this destruction remain debated among scholars, with theories ranging from foreign invasion to internal revolt to deliberate abandonment. In the face of insurmountable challenges, population movements and cultural transformations accompanying imperial collapse, as evidenced by changes in settlement patterns, material culture, and burial practices visible in the archaeological record, reveal complex processes of social reorganization that affected not only former imperial territories but also neighboring regions that absorbed Hittite refugees and cultural influences. The legacy of Hittite imperial collapse as a case study in the fragility of Bronze Age state systems provides important insights into the interconnected nature of ancient civilizations and the vulnerability of complex political structures to environmental, military, and economic pressures that exceeded their adaptive capabilities, while also demonstrating the remarkable resilience of cultural traditions that could survive political catastrophe and continue to influence regional development for centuries. The archaeological rediscovery and modern scholarly understanding of the Hittite Empire represents one of the most remarkable achievements in Near Eastern archaeology and historical linguistics, transforming our knowledge of Bronze Age civilization and revolutionizing understanding of Indo-European linguistic history, ancient diplomacy, and the complex political relationships that characterize the late Bronze Age world. The initial identification of Hittite sites began in the 19th century with European travelers and archaeologists who noted the presence of carved reliefs and massive stone structures at various locations in Turkey, though the significance of these remains and their connection to a major ancient civilization was not immediately recognized by scholars who lacked the linguistic and historical knowledge necessary to interpret the evidence. Hugo Winkler's systematic excavations at Bacchus-Kali beginning in 1906 marked the beginning of scientific Hittite archaeology, with the discovery of the royal archives containing thousands of cuneiform tablets that provided the first direct evidence of Hittite history, culture, and political organization, revealing a civilization whose importance had been completely unknown to modern scholarship. Despite its crucial role in Bronze Age international relations, the decipherment of Hittite cuneiform texts by scholars including Bedřich Hrozný, who first recognized the Indo-European character of the Hittite language, opened up vast new sources of information about Bronze Age history and provided unprecedented insight into the political, religious, and economic life of a major ancient empire. Archaeological